Hey guys, welcome to my review for Zack Snyder's 4-hour cut of Justice League. So, in case you've been living under a rock, the Justice League is the intended product that Zack Snyder wanted to release back in 2017. But I'm going to go a little bit into the history of it. Just initial thoughts right off the bat. The movie is much better than the original film. I'm mainly going to talk spoilers here, so if you don't want to get spoiled, you shouldn't keep listening. It's mainly going to be an analysis on all the scenes and what I think about everything. I'm going to go through the film character by character so we can sort of hit all the moments and how each scene directly relates to each of the characters as opposed to going chronologically. And I'm going to start off by going a little bit into the history of why the Snyder Cut came to be. Back in 2017, the theatrical release of Justice League came out, and it was not the intended product that the director, Zack Snyder, wanted to release. Basically, what happened was he filmed what he claims to be 5 hours of footage, and then, unfortunately, due to a tragic loss in his family, his daughter taking her own life, he had to step down, and the film at that point couldn't be completed. And then Warner Brothers brought in director and writer Joss Whedon to put the film together, basically. But Joss Whedon went in and filmed a bunch of extra scenes and rewrote a lot of the dialogue. And he took the 5 hours that Zack Snyder had filmed and then cut it down to a 2-hour film as was instructed by the studio, basically ruining the entire film. When you watch the final product, it's really not very good. And on top of that, there's a really weird and disgusting distraction in the form of Henry Cavill's face. Basically, Henry Cavill had filmed the entirety of it clean shaven, and then he had to go film the sixth Mission Impossible film, Mission Impossible Fallout, where he plays a character who has a mustache. And then they asked him to come back and film new scenes to replace some of Zack Snyder's footage. And then there was this whole discussion about, whether or not he could keep the mustache. He apparently had to keep it for the Mission Impossible role. So they put a CG lip all over Henry Cavill's face, and it's really horrible and horrifying and distracting because he doesn't look like a person. So now that we have all of the original footage and all of the Joss Whedon footage has been replaced, he doesn't have the gross face, and he just has regular Henry Cavill face, which is amazing. And with the disappointment of the release of the theatrical version of the film, people were starting to make campaigns for the original version to be released. And a lot of people, including myself, didn't think that a completed version of the film existed. And there technically wasn't, because then Warner Brothers had to come in because of the audience backlash, and they gave Zack Snyder millions of dollars in order to complete his cut of the film. And he was also apparently at one point not allowed to make any new footage, but he was allowed to film one scene, which we'll get to, which is pretty great. And because of that, the combination of the streaming service HBO Max, the film could be 4 hours long instead of 2. So not only was the runtime of the film doubled, but so much of the footage that was in the theatrical version would be replaced with the original footage that was shot, which would create a completely different viewing experience. The initial intent of what the director had envisioned, which is what movies should be. And yeah, as stated, this version of the film is a million times better than the original theatrical release. That version is really shitty in comparison to this one. The way that the movie really just builds naturally, but has a really nice slow pace, makes the film work in ways that make the more poignant moments more emotional. And it's honestly really amazing that Zack Snyder got to make his version of the film and got to release what he had always intended on releasing. Maybe not this long, but I think the fact that we get even more of the movie is sort of, the studio apologizing to him for really backstabbing him and totally neutering his movie, basically. So I'm gonna go into the film through every character and sort of talk about each of their journeys. And at the end, I'll talk more about my favorite scenes. But for example, when I talk about Superman, I'm going to hit the scenes of the people that are related to him that I like a lot. So by the time I'm finishing going through all the characters, I'll have covered the entire film. And we're going to start off with Batman. Uh, Batman in the Joss Whedon version was just turned into a complete joke. He wasn't taken as seriously as he was in the previous film. And in this film, you really get the idea that he feels guilty for what his actions in Batman vs. Superman had done and how the world really needs someone like that. Like in the film, you really feel the absence of Superman. And a lot of that is thanks to the guilt that Batman has and the desire he has to bring everyone together. And Ben Affleck, again, similar to the mustache thing, but not as horrifying. When you watch the theatrical cut of the movie, you can tell which parts are reshoots because Ben Affleck looks more sweaty and bloated. But here his body shape is pretty consistent throughout the whole thing. So there's this level of consistency to how Ben Affleck looks. There's more scenes between him and Diana Prince that were in the trailer that we didn't see in the theatrical release, and then more scenes between him and Alfred that are very nice and charming. And yeah, the character is really like he doesn't have much. There isn't a lot about him that's better than the theatrical release, but he's still he's still better done in that all the moments where they treat him as a joke are basically gone. So he still serves the same purpose, but he does it in a way that's more interesting and more in line with what he was in Batman v Superman. And you see a natural progression from how his beliefs changed in that film into this film. Also, another great thing that really didn't make sense in the previous cut of the movie is that now Batman, after he sees Barry Allen, he thinks to himself and he thinks about that nightmare he had in Batman vs. Superman that was basically a premonition of the evil future that was to come. And it's one of those things that I was worried that we just were never going to see that, and we might still not see that, but there's something in the final scene of the movie that I'll get to that makes me think that it's a scene being used as a soldier in a Trojan horse of a film in order to hopefully create buzz for a sequel to be made, for the fans to yell for a sequel to be made in the hands of Zack Snyder. But yeah, I was worried that was never going to be acknowledged again. And it was weird that it wasn't acknowledged in the theatrical cut. But now Bruce seeing Barry Allen and being like, hey, he came to me in a vision. I wonder what that's leading to. That's all really, it makes sense now. Also, before I get to the next character, I want to say that the movie is shot in IMAX and it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, meaning instead of having bars at the top and bottom, you have more space and then the bars are on the sides. And I think from a creative perspective, just like that being what Zack Snyder wanted to do, that's really cool. I'd like a widescreen version of the film to be released at some point. But for this, it's sort of like George Lucas with the prequels, in my opinions, toward that. I don't like the prequels, but I appreciate that George Lucas got to fully make his vision and do exactly what he wanted to do. And Zack Snyder's doing that too. And on top of that, he wanted to film it in black and white. And he said that there is a black and white version that is likely to be released in the future. I don't know how good that's going to look because his films always look so dark and that combined with CG, I don't know if that would make a great black and white experience, but he said that in his mind, the true experience of watching that film would be in the 4:3 aspect ratio in black and white. So it'll be cool to watch the film in black and white at some point in the future. So now we're going to go into Wonder Woman's part in this story. Basically, her introduction is very similar, only that in this version, the criminals are setting up their scheme for a little bit longer and the scene is extended. And also, this is a good place to point this out, but during that scene, you could distinctly hear the music of Danny Elfman. And for this entire movie, Danny Elfman's music has been replaced with Hans Zimmer's original music. And that's very powerful and significant in points that correlate to scenes that happen in previous films, and I'll get that specifically when I'm talking about Superman. But yeah, with the Wonder Woman scene, it just had more time to breathe, and like the action scene. This movie, unlike the theatrical version, is rated R. So she's basically just tearing through people. She's like throwing people against walls, and then like their skulls crack open and there's blood on the walls. And then there's something that is pretty great that I think Zack Snyder hasn't really done to this point, which is that after Wonder Woman saves the the young schoolgirls, one of the girls like looks up to her and says like, I want to be like you one day. And there's like this nice moment of like, oh yeah, like they're superheroes, like they save people. And in the Zack Snyder universe, we haven't really entirely seen the goodness, and like people just like Superman like saving cats from trees and that kind of shit, like showing that they are really good people, and it's not just about throwing monsters through buildings. You also see that Diana Prince has more of a incorporation into the team with Bruce and Alfred, and you see that it's not really just Bruce putting the team together, and it's all sort of a cooperation. And there's this one scene that I don't think is entirely necessary, but is funny, where Wonder Woman's making tea and Alfred's being like really picky about how she makes the tea. It feels like a scene that could have been cut, but at the same time, you see that Bruce doesn't need to be the midpoint between Alfred and Diana, and Diana's and Alfred are comfortable with each other, which is really great. Also, continuing with Wonder Woman, her interactions with Batman are completely different in that in the original version of the film, Batman and Wonder Woman have a whole argument basically out of nowhere. And then the next scene, Batman apologizes to her. This is in the theatrical cut. And in this version, all of that's gone, which is great because it made no sense that they would argue for a bit, then apologize, and then it never gets brought up again. And in fact, here, there's a little bit of romantic tension between Batman and Wonder Woman where, like there's a scene where they're, like, trying to reach for the mouse and they, like, touch hands at the same time. And that's such a movie way of showing that two people might like each other. But then, like, Batman goes, like, oh, it happens. There's just something really funny about the delivery. And there's a lot of that in the movie. Like, particular lines aren't exactly funny, but it's just the way that the actors say it makes them funny. And I'll get to that when I'm talking about The Flash. Also, Wonder Woman gives the killing blow at the end, and it's really amazing. I thought Steppenwolf was basically done, and then she just jumps in the air and chops off his head. And then that's when it's like, oh yeah, this movie's R-rated. Like, and then he gets his head crushed by Darkseid, which is, it's really great that Zack Snyder really had freedom in terms of how brutal the movie could get. And then Diana goes back and explains to Bruce the Age of Heroes. And I was really shocked when I was watching the credits because I saw David Thewlis' name. And David Thewlis plays Lupin in the Potter films, but also he played Ares in Wonder Woman. So I was like, oh shit, Ares is going to be in this movie. And then in my head, I was thinking where he could possibly be. And my guess was an extended version of the Age of Heroes scene. And he's there, along with a different Green Lantern who has really creative death. Like the way that the hand cuts off, but the ring doesn't leave because he's not dead yet. And then Darkseid kills him, and then the ring goes off the severed hand. That's really great. That whole sequence is great, and having Darkseid there instead of Steppenwolf seemed to be more prevalent and more important. Now I'm going to move on to Steppenwolf and his whole story with Darkseid. So in the original version, Steppenwolf had a really horrible design that looked very outdated and bad. And then here, Steppenwolf actually looks very cool. He doesn't look amazing, but if you compare it to the other version, he's a work of art. And then there's like little subtleties that are different. For example, in that really great scene where the Amazons are trying to get rid of the mother box, in the theatrical version, he just brushes off the arrow, but in this version, he snaps it in half, which is really cool. And I'm going to go a little bit on a tangent talking about that scene. That scene's really great because in the theatrical version, we don't really get a scene of Wonder Woman's mother feeling sad for all the Amazons that fell off the cliff. They don't even fall off the cliff in the original version. They're just locked in. And yeah, the sequence basically plays out very similarly, and but it's like so much more interesting because of all the little moments that basically allow the scene time to breathe. And then Steppenwolf is much more threatening than he was in the other version. And there's a really cool part where a bunch of Amazons shoot arrows at Steppenwolf's armor, and his armor, you can see throughout the movie, moves in this weird scale kind of way. And then when all the arrows are in his armor, they like move all at the same time, and the arrows just pop off. It was really cool. And so Steppenwolf actually has motivation in this movie, which is a shock. Basically, he has to collect a bunch of worlds for Darkseid, who in this version I've heard Darkseid is his uncle instead of vice versa. And Steppenwolf basically betrayed Darkseid, so he's got to collect all these worlds for him. And one of them, now is Earth, and apparently it's easier to take because Superman's dead and there aren't any lanterns. Yeah, basically Steppenwolf is trying to get back in the good graces of Darkseid. That's actually character motivation that we didn't have in the previous version. And in this version, he has this weird little crab thing that I initially thought was a Starro. And it can like cling onto your brain and project your knowledge of things. So instead of just torturing you to interrogate you, this crab thing will basically say it for you. And I thought that was a pretty cool addition that, I mean, it wasn't like necessary, but it's neat. And yeah, as stated earlier, Steppenwolf's end is pretty brutal in an amazing way. The way that they basically use him to send a message to Darkseid, that's all really great. And now we're going to go into Aquaman. So originally I was going to talk about that scene at the fisherman's place in the Batman section, but that's more directly to Aquaman, so we're going to go into that now. So that scene's different in several ways in that originally Bruce Wayne just shows up on the Bat Horse, and he basically, there's like pictures on the wall, and he's like, hey, can you tell me about those? Which is very forced. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this, but that scene where Bruce Wayne is fighting the parademon on the roof with the crook, none of that is in this cut, and all of the stuff with like Luthor's notes, none of that's in the movie. That all felt very rushed and forced, and like it was shot just to make the movie move faster instead of the movie taking its time. But yeah, another great thing is that they've established that the people at this dock can't speak English, which now works because there's a whole thing where Aquaman basically says that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but he says it in English. And in the theatrical version, that didn't make sense, but now we get that it was okay for him to say that out loud because all of the fishermen weren't going to understand. And then in the theatrical version, you also have a really creepy close-up of Aquaman where there's a horrible green screen behind him. And that's all gone here. And then there's a scene that I think really should be cut and is just it's too much. But basically, after Aquaman leaves, in a really cool way, by the way, because Batman turns around and then you just see like the water move in a circle, so you get the idea that Aquaman left. All of the people start to sing this weird song that I felt really didn't need to be in the movie. And throughout the movie, there's a lot of weird like what was it called? It was called like lamentful singing or something like that. Like when my brother and I watched it with subtitles, and it was like so many times this like weird lamentful singing starts that it's like too many times. But yeah, it like these girls just like start singing for a while, and it's very weird and awkward. But yeah, overall that scene's much better, and it's cool to see that the fish people, whatever you want to call them, that they are aware that Arthur Curry is Aquaman, and they just don't say anything because he is feeding them by giving them the fish. And so there's much more context there that was needed that we didn't have initially. So then I believe after that, Aquaman goes to the mother box. Oh no, he goes to the throne of a king. I'm a bit confused on this because there's a lot of like Aquaman related stuff that contradicts the Aquaman movie. But in the Aquaman movie, the throne with the king's trident, that was like in the center of the earth, and then now it's not. So I mean, when I get into further Aquaman scenes, I'm gonna explain a little bit more of the inconsistencies there. Some of them are pretty crazy. But yeah, Aquaman goes there, and then he meets in a completely new scene where he meets Willem Dafoe's character, Volko, I believe his name is. And he has a different design than in the Aquaman film. I mean, just in that he has long hair. And then this is where one of the inconsistencies comes in that in both the theatrical and extended versions of Justice League, when people speak underwater, they need to speak in these air bubbles. Whereas in the Aquaman film, they can just speak and understand each other, which is much more convenient. But yeah, overall, this scene's really cool. I remember, like, way back when, like in 2016, they were talking about how Willem Dafoe was going to be in the film, and then you watch the theatrical cut, and he's just not there. And then he's in the Aquaman film, so they kept him to play that character, which is really cool. But yeah, the scene's pretty cool, and like I think it's setting up Arthur's arc pretty well, but mainly in the Aquaman film. In this movie, he's one of the least developed characters, and he goes through like he's one of the characters that really doesn't have much of an arc in comparison to characters that I'll get to later. But yeah, the scene's pretty interesting and pretty cool, and then it sort of brings up some other questions, but even though it contradicts the James Wan Aquaman film, it's cool that Zack Snyder was like, well, I was gonna do all this before James Wan did his Aquaman movie, so I'm just gonna say fuck it and make the movie that, like, release the movie that I made, even though there are contradictions. But that feels like something that maybe they should have just talked about and said, like, hey, how about you just don't do the air bubble stuff, so that way in my movie it's more convenient for them to just speak. And then Atlantis looks different. It's more technologically advanced in the Aquaman film, but here it's more ancient and made of stone, which it's fine. I mean, it's a little annoying, but it's not the biggest deal. So then the next time we see Aquaman, he saves a fisherman, I believe. That's the scene. And he saves a fisherman from a sinking boat, and then he goes in and gets a beer in a storm, and then he walks out. And then my heart broke a little bit because instead of the theatrical version where they use the White Stripes song "Achy Thump," they use a different song that's more peaceful and less like. I feel like the Achy Thump song, the White Stripes song, fit much better with like Jason Momoa's version of Aquaman that's supposed to be this like surfer badass who like kicks trash cans, that type of character. But yeah, again, this is Zack Snyder's vision of the movie, and this is what he wanted to do. So good for him. Then after that, this is where some of the really big Aquaman contradictions start. Basically, the area where the mother box is being protected by a bunch of guards, you have Mara show up, and then instead of creating an air bubble, she does these little chirps that sound like dolphin noises. So again, that goes back to the whole thing. It's like they can't speak underwater unless they have these air bubbles. But then the really weird thing is she makes an air bubble, and then Mara speaks, and she has a British accent, which like threw my brother and I way off, because in the theatrical version she has an American accent, and in the James Wan version she has an American accent, and then here she has a British one. And then I did some research, and it turns out that Joss Whedon had Amber Heard dub her lines over her British accent just with an American accent, and then to keep consistency, James Wan had her speak with an American accent. But it's really weird now because people are going to see this version as the definitive version of the film, but we're going to have her speaking with a British accent, and then in the movie right after this, she speaks with an American accent. She goes from British to American, which is it was really bizarre. And like, I get that Zack Snyder was trying to restore, his vision of the movie, and like with the air bubbles and the chirping, I feel like that might be something forgivable, but I think it would have been really easy for Zack Snyder, who, by the way, got Amber Heard back to film more footage, if he got her to dub over her lines in her American accent just to keep consistency with James Wan's movie. Again, that's not a huge deal. It does bother me a little bit, but it's just really bizarre. Like, I was so shocked to hear her speak with a British accent. Also, another contradiction, apparently in in this movie, I must have missed this. She mentioned that her parents are dead, but then in the James Wan movie, in Aquaman, her father is apparently Dolph Lundgren's character. So he's just alive unless maybe they want to rewrite it so she's his adopted daughter. So yeah, again, there's just all these things between Snyder Cut and other movies that don't exactly entirely add up. Specifically with Aquaman. For the rest of it, it's pretty consistent. Wonder Woman can't fly, but that's like a Patty Jenkins problem because she made her fly, even though in Justice League and Batman v Superman she can't fly. So yeah, now in this scene, Mara goes into the area where the mother box is, and some of the guards have been disappearing, taken by Steppenwolf and the Parademons. And then Steppenwolf attacks, and Aquaman comes in and saves Mara. And then Steppenwolf takes the mother box and bails. And this is where the scene from the theatrical version happens, only with Mara with a British accent. And then Mara and Aquaman talk about how, he's got to like take the throne and do something about this. So the scene's a bit redundant of the scene with the Willem Dafoe. But it's always good to like see more of it, and to show that there are other people that are really like stressing for him to take the throne and to to do good, and it's in this moment that he realizes that he's got to step up and actually join Batman and them. Also, another weird note, Willem Dafoe holds up his mom's trident, but it's not a trident. It's got 5, what would you call those? Like picks, whatever. And instead of 3, so that was really distracting. But the cool thing is that it looks like the one from the James Wan film, so at least that was kept consistent. But yeah, just a little note. So then that's when Aquaman shows up in the sewer later in the film. And I'll use this as a segue to talk about that scene where the team's all together. I thought that scene was pretty good. It's like slightly better than the theatrical version in that it has extra stuff in it. But the fight overall is well done, and Steppenwolf obviously looks better. It's not too different, and the parts that I really liked are related to a character that I haven't gotten to yet, so I'll get to him. And Aquaman's involvement is basically he just saves them from the water because he's the water guy. And then it was a bit different in that when Steppenwolf releases the missile and breaks the hole that releases the water from Gotham Harbor, you see Aquaman go through the hole, and I'm pretty sure that was not in the theatrical version. And then that's what Diana's looking at before they all get out of there. And then there's another really nice moment where Aquaman and Flash are talking, and then Aquaman's annoyed at the burden that Cyborg has. And then Flash is like, if I don't remember what Flash says, I'll have to look at it again, but you really see that Aquaman, he cares about people, especially younger people that have such responsibility, probably because it's related to himself and how he felt growing up. Especially because Cyborg and him have the connection of having dead mothers that basically led to their origin stories. Flash does too, but it's not really brought up around the team in this film. Also, another thing, the scene where Cyborg is sitting on the lasso, that's not in this version of the movie. And that scene was funny, but at the same time, it's like the lasso wasn't wrapped around him, so it doesn't make sense that he'd be telling the truth. And overall, I'm glad it's gone. But yeah, Aquaman, he doesn't have the most character development of any of the characters in the movie, but like he's still done well, and obviously it's more in his movie that we see his growth. So now I'm going to get into Cyborg, the character who, aside from Flash, probably has the best character development of anyone on the league, especially in comparison to the theatrical version where he was basically neutered. So the first time we see Cyborg in this movie, he is basically alone and brooding, very much like in the theatrical version, only some of the dialogue's different. Like in the theatrical version, which I think I like the dialogue there more, Victor's dad comes in, and then Victor says, "You know all about making monsters, don't you?" And then Victor's dad is like, "Victor, you are not a monster." And then Victor says, "It's funny that you thought I was talking about me," which is, I think that's some really great dialogue. But in this version, it's slightly different. And I mean, actually, we see Cyborg earlier in the movie in the first scene, actually, when Superman is yelling after he got stabbed by Doomsday with the kryptonite spear. And then we see Cyborg reacting to the mother box starting to shake. But this is his first real scene in the movie. And then we get all these like great flashback scenes that weren't in the theatrical version, where we see that he was helping one of his friends cheat because she was going through hard times in her life, and he hacked into the university computer to get her good grades. And then you see that he's like, a football star, and then he has issues with his dad because his dad's so busy at Star Labs all the time that he can't make things like the football game. And then him and his mom are driving home and talking about how his dad basically doesn't have an excuse for showing up, and he doesn't feel love from his father, which is basically the whole emotional core of the film, basically. And then Cyborg's mom does what my mom does all the fucking time, which is she's driving, and instead of looking at the road, she's looking out the side. And then a car hits them, killing the mother and making Cyborg, Victor Stone, into Cyborg. And then Cyborg's dad shows up to the hospital, and there's some really great emotional stuff here because he sees that his son can't even take up half the bed, and because his body from basically ribs down is just gone, which really, it doesn't make sense that he's alive, but comic book movie, whatever. And then his, you just think about it and you get the idea that if his dad had just shown up to the football game, his wife would be alive and his son wouldn't be turning into, wouldn't have to turn into a cyborg person. So yeah, then his dad goes and gets the mother box, and he basically applies it to Cyborg, as we saw in the footage in Batman v Superman. And, he turns him into a cyborg based off the technology of the mother box. And then Cyborg's dad basically hates him and resents him for making him into this thing that he sees as a monster. He's only human from the waist up, and he's got one arm. So he really feels like this disgusting monster. And then his dad tries to talk to him, leaves him a recording, and then Cyborg listens to the recording and then realizes of all the unlocked potential that he has because of his constantly evolving technological body. He can fly. He helps this one woman with this single mom, and he gets her a bunch of money by just hacking the system with his his cyborg powers. And he gives her, she looks in her ATM, and she's got a bunch of money that is going to help her with her shitty life. So doing that stuff like that makes him start to realize that he can use this as a gift for good. And then, unlike the theatrical version, it's slightly different. Wonder Woman is looking for him to recruit him on the team. And then in the Joss Whedon version of the movie, the theatrical version, text comes up, and he asks why she's looking for him. And then afterwards, she basically, in the theatrical version, she goes after him, and he's wearing a hoodie. And he basically tells her to fuck off. But in this version, it's different because he's like, I know you're looking for me, meet me here. And then she shows up to that place, and instead you have a really cool scene where the power goes out and he flies to her. And I'm pretty sure in the theatrical version the power also goes out, but it's better done here. And then he lands, and she's trying to get him to join the team, and he says fuck the world. Again, this is rated R, so you can say fuck. Really great. So yeah, that scene basically plays out the same way, but it's a bit more interesting because now we understand Victor's backstory. So then after that, chronologically, Victor meets up with the team, and then Aquaman is like, if you're made from the mother box, how can we trust you and all that? And then Victor comes up, basically all together, they come up with the idea that they can resurrect Superman. I'm going to get more into the feels when it comes to that Superman stuff, but it's done really well. And I'll get to that when I talk about Superman. But basically, it's Victor's idea. in the end. And basically, he comes up with the whole experiment to activate the mother box to bring Superman back to life. And then at the ending of the film, Victor has a really great moment where I'll talk about the climax towards the end, but he's trying to separate the mother boxes, and then he has this great moment inside his head where his family, it's not actually his family, it's the mother boxes. They're trying to get him to just let go and trying to seduce him into giving up and becoming this normal person again. And then one of the three visions, the visions being his parents and himself as a regular human, tell him that he doesn't have to continue to be broken. And then he has this really great, cathartic, emotional moment where he says, "I'm not broken," and resists and and decides that it's right for him to continue being the way he is and that it was for a reason. In this version, he has less interactions with Flash than he does in the theatrical version, which is fine. And also, he doesn't say "booyah" at the end, which was a little bit disappointing. And then his armor doesn't change into the smooth version of the armor, which I prefer to the weird, like, choppy looking one that he has for the majority of the film. But yeah, like hands down, Cyborg is the most interesting character in the movie. Like, I remember before the movie came out, Zack Snyder said that Cyborg was really the heart and soul of the movie, and he wasn't lying. Cyborg really got the meat on his character bones that he needed for us to care about him. And then when it comes to his decision to continue to live as he has been the past year, you really understand why he's doing that, and you feel all of the emotions that come with it. So now I'm going to talk about Flash, and boy, was he an improvement between both cuts. He still has some lines that aren't great. They're a little bit cringy, but like, I remember I thought I liked him the first time I watched the theatrical version, and then I watched it again. I'm like, he's kind of annoying. But they got rid of a lot of that and replaced some of the shit jokes with some good jokes, and there were two that made me laugh out loud pretty hard. So yeah, basically, Flash doesn't get introduced into the movie like over an hour in. So a little bit over the first fourth of the movie. And then he's basically going in to get a job at a pet walking place. And then he sees this girl who is Iris West, who apparently in the comic books is his love interest. I haven't seen any of the CW shows, so I don't know about any of that sort of stuff. But yeah, he runs into her. He looks at her a little bit creepily, but it's okay. And the way that, and let me go back a bit, the way that the scene is set up is pretty cool because it says, you basically, the camera pans down to the city, and then you have a truck go by, which is about to be a really important truck that you don't know. And then you have a sign that says, "Please reduce speed," which is a pretty cute joke, because we're about to be introduced to the Flash. So then Flash goes, Barry Allen goes to get that job, and then he sees Iris, looks at her a bit creepily. And then this part I thought was stupid. You have the truck driver, he's eating a cheeseburger, and then he drops it, and he's reaching for it for what feels like forever. Like, it feels like he goes blocks and blocks, miraculously not hitting anything, trying to get this cheeseburger that is totally ruined. So he just keeps driving and driving, trying to reach this cheeseburger, which is what's going to cause the conflict in the situation. So, unbeknownst to Barry, this is happening, and then Barry's, he's like, cracking jokes, but he himself is not cracking jokes, but in the sake of the movie, they're jokes, that aren't very funny. I feel like maybe Ezra Miller improvised, and then he basically tries to give the lady his resume, which is all like cut up and gross. And then Iris is driving away in her car, but she's looking at Barry instead of looking at the road. Again, hi, Mom. And then the truck basically hits the front of hers, and then she gets launched in the air. Barry turns around, and then he goes into, speed mode. And then everything slows down, and then he starts walking, and his feet rip through the shoes because he's not wearing his suit. And then he runs over, and really cool scene that was in the trailer, not in the theatrical version, but is now in this one, where he pokes the glass and then he just breaks through. And then you have this song that I don't think entirely fits the scene, but it's fine. And then he like walks over, his feet start breaking into the gravel. It's really cool. And then he really gently picks up Iris, who's floating in the air, surrounded by. There was a hot dog vendor, and then the little vending. I don't know. I can't remember what it's called. Little vending thing. Gets like launched into the air, and then she's like floating around these hot dogs and hot dog buns. And then Barry like very carefully picks her up. I mean, first he like strokes her hair a little bit, kind of creepy. And then he lightly puts her down. And a lot of people said it was creepy, like he was groping her. I didn't see it that way. I saw it that, because he's moving so fast, he has to be extra careful in order. Like, in The Boys when a train just runs through a person like that. Like, so he doesn't fucking destroy her by like touching her at, a crazy speed. So then he lightly puts her down, and then the car flips and explodes. You see that in the trailer. And then they look at each other, and he feels a bit awkward, so then he breaks eye contact and just runs back into the pet store. But not before. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. When everything's moving in slow motion, he picks up a hot dog and puts it in his pocket. And my brother and I were laughing, like, what, is he going to say that for later? But then it makes sense, because when he runs back to the store, he's surrounded by the dogs, and the woman in the store is like, what the fuck? Like, that car just flipped. And of course, Flash moves so fast that she didn't see him. And now he's like playing with the dogs, and he uses that hot dog to, get them excited. And he's like, I always keep a treat for my furry friends. And then or something like that. And he's like, so I start work Monday. And, again, I didn't find it that funny, but, it still worked, and it was a pretty good introduction scene for the character. So then after that, Flash visits his dad in prison. Very similar scene, but slightly extended, where his dad basically tells him to give up on him and not to like waste his time trying to prove that his father is innocent. You get a little bit of that story, which seems like it might be important in the future Flash film that Andy Muschietti is going to direct. And so basically his dad tells him that he needs to like give up on his desire to try to prove that he's innocent and that his father didn't kill his mother. And then he's basically like, no, don't. I'm going to pretend like you didn't say that. And he tells his dad like they need to stop having these conversations, and that they need to just enjoy their 10 minutes that they have together instead of constantly bickering about this. And it's a pretty good scene that establishes Barry Allen pretty well. The first scene was to establish his powers and his sense of humor, and then this scene is to establish his heart, and it becomes more important towards the end. Again, I think aside from Cyborg, Flash has the best arc in this movie. So then the next time we see Flash after that, he goes to his little apartment, if you want to call it that. Very similar to the theatrical version. In fact, it's basically the same scene, except they get rid of some jokes that Joss Whedon wrote. And then he goes into his apartment. One of the TVs is playing Rick and Morty. And Bruce Wayne's sitting there, and then Bruce Wayne throws the Batarang, reveals himself to Flash. Tells him he wants Flash to join the team. You get some jokes that are in the theatrical cut that actually are funny. And then they get rid of all the like stupid jokes about brunch and whatever. And then Flash is like, I'm in because I need friends. And then after that, you have Bruce and Batman go into the car. It's the same exact thing as the theatrical version. Flash is still eating the grossest pizza I've ever seen. Like when you watch that scene when Flash is holding that box of pizza, just like pause the movie and look at the pizza. It's so fucking gross looking. But yeah, that scene plays out basically the same thing. You get an extra shot of Bruce's car like zooming onto the highway. That's not in the theatrical cut, if I remember correctly. So then next time we see Barry Allen, they're all going to Stryker's Island to fight Steppenwolf, who apparently has taken up a bunch of the scientists that were near the mother box, because apparently the mother box's smell is on them. And then you have the whole thing where they go to Gordon's, to GCPD, and Commissioner Gordon's there. And it's basically the same scene with Commissioner Gordon, except you have a little bit of extra time before that scene starts. There's a little bit extra, a couple seconds, but not much. By the way, another weird inconsistency, not inconsistency, but just difference. GCPD here looks completely different to the way it looks in Birds of Prey. It's much like more modern in Birds of Prey, and here it looks more gothic, like one of the Burton films. But yeah, that's just a little thing. Anyway, yeah, that's the next time we see Flash, I'm pretty sure. And then yeah, they go to Stryker's Island, and yeah, like Flash has some like really good scenes. Like there isn't that thing where Batman tells him like save one person, but instead he starts saving a bunch of people, and none of that stuff about him not having done battle, which doesn't make sense because, I mean, him saying he hadn't done battle wouldn't make much sense because in Suicide Squad he took out Captain Boomerang, so it doesn't really add up. So this version's better in that sense. And then he starts saving people, and there's like funny stuff where he like pauses to Cyborg's dad, and he's like, "You good?" And then this really cool scene where he like stops all this rubble from falling onto the scientists. Really well done. And then they got rid of the whole stupid scene where he falls on Wonder Woman's boobs, which, by the way, that was a Joss Whedon edition, and Gal Gadot really didn't want to do it, so they had to use a stunt double. Yeah, that's really fucking dumb. No one wants to see Flash accidentally fall on Wonder Woman's boobs. It's not funny. So yeah, and then after that, they like basically save everyone. And then after that, they're in the hangar and they're talking about the idea of resurrecting Superman. The camera does this whole like 360 turn where every person says the next line of dialogue that I don't really like in movies. But then Flash has a really funny moment where he's like, we're all thinking it. And he's like, who's going to say it? I'm not going to say it. And again, it's one of those lines, it's not really funny, but just the way he said it made me burst out laughing. All of Flash's dialogue in the movie is a lot better, and him as a whole is better. And then you don't have that dumb shit where he's like running around the Batcave and he's like, it's like a cave, like a bat cave, and it's just I always hate that part. I'm glad it's not here. So yeah, then in the they go to resurrect Superman. They dig up his body, and it's not as weird and disrespectful as it was in the other version, because instead of just Cyborg and him digging up the grave, you've got everyone's there. And then you have this funny thing where Flash is like, so Wonder Woman, do you think she'd ever go for a younger guy? And then Cyborg's like, she's 5,000 years old, Barry. Every guy's a younger guy. Great line. And then, you've got Flash talking a little bit about how Superman was his hero. And then earlier in the movie, when they're in Stryker's Island, he says, I'm really missing Superman right around now. And it's like a joke about, Steppenwolf being really intimidating. But it still works, and you really, I'm going to get to it when I talk about Superman next. But you really feel the absence of Superman in the movie. And a lot of it is like thanks to Barry. So then in the actual Superman resurrection scene, which is very similar to the other version, they go to, in the theatrical version, they say it's Zod's ship, which I thought it was because it had all that, stuff underwater. But in this version, they keep calling it the Superman ship. And then you see all of the suits come out. So I thought that was, like, I feel like there's not a lot of explanation for that. I was really confused about that because I thought Superman's ship was in a totally different place, and they built that tarp around Zod's ship, which is where Lex had, put General Zod's body to create Doomsday. So I still have questions about that, but whatever, we'll get them someday, I guess. Anyway, then the Flash runs, and for the first time we get a really cool establishment as to how his powers work. We see that when he runs, and this isn't in the theatrical cut, he can reach a speed where time starts to go backwards. So the cube hits the water before he can electrocute it, and then he makes it to a speed where the cube then starts moving backwards, and everything starts moving backwards, which becomes important later in the film. Because in the climax of the movie, the characters aren't able to stop the mother boxes from joining, and that causing the anti-life equation, which is not in the theatrical version, from happening. And then the anti-life equation happens, kills everyone, and then the Flash has to run and go back in time slightly by a few seconds and stop the anti-life equation from happening and killing all the heroes, which was very cool and not like the theatrical version. They're actually stakes, and they get rid of like him trying to save the Russian family. The Russian family is completely gone from this movie. So Superman lifting the building, and Flash actually has something important to do in the movie. And then they try to raise the stakes a little bit by having him get shot by one parademon, which I thought was complete bullshit. The fact that he was like running so fast and the parademon just got a lucky shot. If there were multiple parademons, I would have believed that, but I thought that was a little bit ridiculous. But yeah, that being said, when he's running, faster than the speed of light, it's very visually cool. The ground starts to build beneath his feet right, at the second or less than a second, if he's going faster than the speed of light, that his feet touch the ground. And, it was a bit weird because he was talking out loud in terms of like his emotional change, and his emotional growth. But there really wasn't another way to convey that. And he's like talking, to his dad, and how he's like trying to, be one of the greats, be a hero. And I thought that for the most part worked on an emotional level. So yeah, overall, again, Flash much better done in the 4-hour cut than he is in the theatrical cut. And also, I just want to say they get rid of that after credits scene where Flash and Superman are racing each other. That's all gone. And I thought that scene was pretty cute, pretty cool. But yeah, they got rid of it, which is fine. So now we're going to talk about Superman, who is not in the movie for, I want to say like maybe half of it, but maybe it's a little bit before the halfway point. And yeah, this movie really makes you miss Superman. Like in the theatrical version, there's this whole montage that's not in this version, even though they use some of the same shots. But you really feel the absence of Superman through the people and through the way that they speak about him. Mainly Batman, but also that's what Lois Lane is basically there to do. And you have Lois feeling so like heartbroken and alone without him. And then every day she gets coffee and she visits this cop to go see the destroyed memoriam from Batman v Superman. And that cleverly comes into the plot later in a way that it didn't in the theatrical version. And then, you see Superman's mom loses the farm, and, she's feeling really horrible. She visits Clark's grave and she feels really horrible about the death of her son. She's all alone. You have Lois Lane like holding Superman's cape and feeling sad for a little bit, and then afterwards you have her in bed and she like reaches to the to his side of the bed and he's not there, which I feel is like that's done a lot in movies, but it's fine. And then she opens a drawer to get something. I actually at this moment don't remember what it was because I was distracted because of pregnancy tests in the drawer. So I was like, does she have like a super baby inside of her? Like it has to be, that can't be an accident. Like it has to be deliberate that there was a pregnancy test like put in the drawer for the sake of the movie, So I feel like they're maybe trying to establish that maybe her and Clark have a child or are going to have a child. And you really feel the absence of Superman in another scene where you have the League in the hangar, as I mentioned earlier, and they're talking about just like how he was really like this symbol of like goodness that gave people hope. And now the world was in chaos because of him not being there. And, they play like the Hans Zimmer music and it's a bit manipulative, but at the same time, it really works on me. And it's like, you're like, shit, like they really need him back. Like he was such a great force. So then when he does come back, it is satisfying. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk a bit about Martha and Lois Lane speaking about Clark. And I thought that this scene was really good and emotional, which is why I was scared of where it's going. Basically, before the movie came out, Zack Snyder released some sketches that was Lois and Martha talking about Clark Kent. And then afterwards, Martha walks out, turns into Martian Manhunter, and then turns into Swanwick and goes away. And then I saw this scene, and I was really enjoying it, and I was like, oh shit, this is the scene that ends with Martian Manhunter. And I said that in a bad way, because the scene was so beautiful and emotional where, they're talking about how Martha sees the people in the streets like missing him, and then she's like, yeah, but you didn't know my son, like you really didn't know who he really was. And she says that Lois really knew who he was and was one of the few people who really knew him not as Superman, but as Clark Kent. So then I thought that was a beautiful scene, and I was like, don't tell me Zack Snyder's about to ruin this by having that one of those people wasn't even one of the people in that very beautiful and emotional conversation. Martha Kent says bye to Lois. Martha Kent walks into the hallway, sadly, turns into Martian Manhunter, turns into Swanwick, and goes away. And the way I'm trying to justify that is like, well, maybe that's when he turns into that person, it's like that's literally what she would have said, but it's really not the same. I think it really ruins the emotional significance of that scene. And not only that, but it's just weird that Martian Manhunter's been around this whole time. It feels a little bit too fan servicey, and that he hasn't interfered. And the way Zack Snyder explained it was that basically he's been Swanwick from the beginning, and that Swanwick was never a person on Earth. Martian Manhunter, that's his alter ego, basically. He didn't base him off a person that he saw. And he's been like subtly trying to convince people to do their best. Instead of interfering himself, which is fine, I guess. But then there's some lines of dialogue that feel way too human for it to be said by a Martian person, but it's okay. So then on to Superman's resurrection. Superman gets resurrected. He wakes up. The sky is not they changed the color correction, and now the sky's darker. Superman doesn't have the weird lip, which is great. And then he, like in the theatrical version, goes crazy. The fight's a bit longer. Fights Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Cyborg. And then Batman shows up, and Batman, I forgot to mention this earlier, Alfred developed these gauntlets for him that can stop both Steppenwolf's rays and the guns from the Parademons and Superman's laser vision, that sort of stuff. They're basically Wonder Woman's gauntlets for Batman. Superman knocks Batman around, and then Lois comes out. And the reason she comes out here is because she went to visit the site every day, as opposed to in the theatrical version where Batman calls Lois Lane like the big guns and has that she was just around in order to calm Superman in case he went crazy, which it's like that's already so belittling to Lois Lane as a character, in my opinion. So it's like already in the Snyder Cut, she doesn't have a lot to do, so it's good to like have her actually feel like a character instead of having her feel like a tool for the sake of the plot to move along for Superman. So then again, Superman picks her up, flies away. There's no do you bleed moment, which is good. And then there's no Superman getting hurt. I mean there's no Batman getting hurt and saying something's definitely broken. And then they include Cyborg saving the cop and saying you should probably move. So then after that, Superman takes Lois to the farm. Martha Kent shows up. But not before Lois Lane was apparently dubbed, which shocked me. Because in the theatrical cut, Superman says, like, I remember, or something like that. He says, like, I remember this place. And as Lois Lane says, you spoke, because up to that point in the Snyder cut, she hadn't spoken. And then Superman said, hadn't I always? But in the theatrical cut, it's different because Superman says, I remember this place. And then Lois Lane was dubbed over, which I never knew. I feel like no one ever knew. And she says, you smell good, which is really fucking weird. And he says, didn't I always? So Joss Whedon dubbed over that line, I guess because my brother pointed this out. Earlier, he tells Batman, do you bleed, and that sort of stuff. Whereas in the Snyder Cut, he doesn't speak up to that point. So it makes sense. I guess Joss Whedon just wanted to keep that scene and wanted it to change the dialogue in that moment. And then you have him and Lois in the house. And then one of my favorite emotional moments in the movie, Superman's looking out the window and then the camera zooms out and he talks about how he had a good time on the farm as a child. Camera zooms out and then you have the swing. And the swing is the same swing that he sat on in Man of Steel when he saved the kid from the bus and his mom was not Superman's mom, but the kid's mom was basically talking about how he was like an act of God or whatever. And that's the day that he found out that he was an alien from another planet. So then, Martha Kent shows up after that. He holds both of them. He tells Lois Lane, like, I'll take that as a yes because she's wearing his wedding ring. He never took it off. And then after that, he goes to his ship. And then you have what I think is the best scene in the movie. aside from Martha and Lois talking before it's ruined by the Martian Manhunter reveal. You have both both of his fathers, Jor-El and Jonathan Kent, speaking to him, and throughout the movies, you always got this idea that he felt that those two voices were at war. His father said he would save humanity. Jor-El said he would save humanity, but Jonathan Kent said that he might have to hide until one day he could stand among the human race. And now both of what they say is like said over each other with, the amazing Hans Zimmer music playing over it. And you see that both of them are complimenting each other. Both of his fathers and what they wanted for him are completely lining up with what he thinks is right and what he wants to do. So then he puts on the black suit, which is not in the theatrical version. It was color corrected. And then Superman flies away. And I think that combined with, the monologue with the music, that whole scene is probably my favorite scene in the film. It's very emotional and has basically built from Man of Steel. And then Superman goes in and saves the day. He stops Cyborg from getting cut with the axe. It instead goes on Superman's shoulder. And I was worried that they were going to get rid of Superman's freeze breath from the theatrical cut. And they get rid of that scene, but instead he uses the freeze breath to freeze Steppenwolf's axe and cut the axe. So I'm really glad that in both versions he's got the freeze breath. And then he basically just goes to town on Steppenwolf, beats the shit out of him really violently, like he's Homelander or something. Cuts off like half of like one of his horns. So yeah, in general, Superman's return is really well done. And it feels like very like uplifting and triumphant in comparison to how it did in the other version, where it really didn't feel like that, but they tried to manipulate you into feeling that by using the 70s version of the Superman theme, the John Williams version. So that basically gets us through all the characters. So now I'm going to talk about the climax and the ending of the movie. So yeah, basically the climax is really well done for the most part. They changed the lighting where the sky was red initially and now it's completely black. And there's like little like moments of just like quick dialogue that's not there. Like when Aquaman jumped in the theatrical version, he yelled woohoo, but not in this version. The same thing earlier in the movie when they're at Stryker's Island, when Cyborg flies away. In the theatrical version, Flash is like, did he just bail? And I thought that was a really funny joke, but it's not in this version of the movie. And then you have the same thing where Cyborg saves Aquaman when he's falling. And then in this version, he says, "You're welcome." And then Aquaman says, "My man." But in the other version, he says, "Ride's not over yet." So it's just little things like that are different. And then you have more Batman fighting the parademons. You see the parademons with the cannons shooting at Flash, which is not in the theatrical version because the whole Flash having to run faster than the speed of light plot is not in the theatrical version. And then you have Batman, scaring off the parademons with the Batmobile, but that's different because in the theatrical version, he uses the sound of these alarms in order to get the parademons to follow him, and then here he doesn't, if I'm remembering correctly. And then, yeah, they basically send a message to Darkseid by sending him the severed head of Steppenwolf. And then you have Darkseid there. You have this old woman character and his henchmen. And this old woman, I know her from the Harley Quinn animated series. That's all I know her from. I know it sounds like such a fake comic book reader thing to say. But yeah, I know that they have some sort of significance. Just I'm not entirely familiar with that yet. And then, you have that shot where they're all on top of the nuclear plant, and then Cyborg and Flash do the fist bump. Superman helps up Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman are just standing there. And then the back of the plane opens. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to mention, Superman goes to visit Alfred before he goes to Russia in the ghost town. And then, you have the whole thing where Alfred's like, "You said you'd come. Let's hope you're not too late," all that. Which is cool to finally see. And then, yeah, by the way, I love how now after Man of Steel and all that horrible stuff about like Zack Snyder constantly killing a bunch of innocent people, like since then in Batman v Superman and this, it's just like, oh, it's unpopulated, or it's like, oh, it's just a ghost town, so he can have all of like his buildings getting destroyed without any innocent people getting 9/11 like they did in Man of Steel. So yeah, I think the climax is pretty good. My only thing is, I feel like with most DC movies in general, the set pieces are not very interesting. Like, they look very gray and bland and not very interesting. And Marvel films, they always seem to put an effort into the environments where the characters fight. I'd say the best set piece of any DCEU movie is when Aquaman and Mera in the Aquaman film are in Italy and they're running across the rooftops. Aquaman also has easily the best action of any DCEU movie. The way that the camera goes around the action is really well done. It's very fluid and organic. So that's like one of my few complaints about the movie. But we figured that the climax was going to be similar, just because, it's an extended version of the film. It's not, a completely different version of the movie. They weren't gonna, be on the moon or anything like that. Yeah, so then they save the day, and then we have the new scene that Zack Snyder filmed in the epilogue, which I think is, aside from the Superman scene, the coolest scene in the movie. Yeah, so then they save the day, and then we have a quick scene with Lex Luthor, which I was not expecting them to carry this over. I thought this was going to be a Joss Whedon thing. But basically, Lex Luthor is sitting on his yacht, Deathstroke shows up, and then instead of Lex Luthor telling Deathstroke that they should come up with their own league or their own Legion of Doom, that type of supervillain team, Lex Luthor tells Deathstroke that he knows the identity of Batman, and that it's Bruce Wayne. So then Deathstroke and Lex Luthor celebrate. Just a quick scene, very similar to the theatrical version, only the reveal is different. And then we have the extra scene that Zack Snyder shot, which, aside from the emotional Superman stuff, is my favorite scene in the movie. Basically, it's a continuation sometime later of the nightmare sequence from Batman versus Superman. And you've got Batman there and Mera, who still has a British accent. And you have Deathstroke with a mohawk. You have Cyborg, and then you have Flash with his suit from Bruce Wayne's Vision in Batman v Superman. And the scene is really cool. Mera, mentions basically that Aquaman's dead. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, but when they're going to resurrect Superman, Cyborg gets visions of the future, and he gets freaked out, and he's like, no, let's stop this. But then Flash thinks he says go, which, then becomes irreversible. They bring back Superman. I thought that's really great. And in that vision, he sees that Wonder Woman is dead, and that Superman is wearing the black suit at the site of Darkseid, and that he flies up holding the cowl of Batman, and that he killed Batman. Anyway, back to this last scene. They're all headed to meet the Joker, who is sitting with long hair on a car. And then Batman and Joker basically just roast each other for the next 5 minutes. Joker brings up the whole thing of, why did you send Robin to, a boy to do a man's job? He refers to him as the Boy Wonder. And then he talks about, Batman having dead parents. And then Batman mentions that Harley Quinn died in his arms, which, that was the thing that, got me. I was like, holy shit, they just said that Harley Quinn's gonna die. And that he promised her that he would kill Joker solely for her. But basically, the reason that this is happening is because, the reason Joker is, being such an asshole more than usual is because he knows Batman is there for his help. And then we see that Joker is teaming up. Joker has something, I guess, that Batman wants. So Joker is teaming up with Batman, Mera, Deathstroke, Cyborg, and the Flash. And then in that moment, Superman comes out of the sky, and he has his red laser eyes, and it looks like he's basically gonna kill all of them. Actually, earlier I said that this happened after the last nightmare sequence. It's probably the other way around, seeing that in Batman's other dream, Superman killed him, but maybe all of his dreams end with Superman killing him, and that's not, those parts aren't the reality. And anyway, Zack Snyder said that the next movie would be an entire, if he could make it, would be an entire Wasteland, Mad Max Nightmare World movie with flashbacks, which would be really awesome. Then Bruce Wayne wakes up from the dream. He goes outside, and then Martian Manhunter lands. He's like, hi, I'm Martian Manhunter. And then Martian Manhunter flies away, and the movie ends. So yeah, overall, I think that like it's no competition. I agree with most people. This is the version of the movie that people will watch from now on. They're going to completely forget the theatrical version. This is the Justice League, you know. And they're I don't really have a lot to complain about. I think some scenes could be cut here or there. Um, and like you know the not all of the Flash stuff works. Aquaman could be better developed, but overall, it's like this movie is such a treat, and it's so great that it is as long as it is. It's like they're giving the fans so much of what they want that like it feels like they're giving us extra because as an apology, you know. And I was a person who, when I initially heard about the Snyder Cut, I did not think it was real. And then it wasn't until Jason Momoa said that a cut exists that I was like, okay, maybe this thing is real. Um, but even then, I thought that we would never get it because the CGI wasn't finished, the editing, it wasn't edited together, and Zack Snyder needed a lot of money to complete it. But all that being said, I'm really glad that the film is completed and that we have it now. I hope in the future it gets released on 4K or Blu-ray or whatever, so we can watch it. And hopefully a widescreen version would be cool. But I don't know that they'll do that. But yeah, I talked about the movie a lot. I obviously recommend it if you've seen all of the other DCU movies. You're probably going to see it anyway. I don't know why I need to recommend it, but I do like it quite a bit. I don't know where it ranks with the other DC movies. Like Suicide Squad's at the bottom. Man of Steel, Shazam, and Wonder Woman, those are towards the top. I like Batman v Superman quite a bit. Aquaman, not so much. Unpopular opinion. Birds of Prey, not so much. Wonder Woman 1984, eh. But it's towards the top of the list for sure. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my really in-depth thoughts on the movie. I hope you see it. If you've seen it, comment, let me know what you thought. And what you maybe think of my opinions. Maybe want to challenge some of them. That'd be cool. So yeah, thank you so much for watching the video, and look forward to more in the near future.